Good morning, everyone. I'm Matt Helmer, the Managing Director at the Aspen Institute Economic Opportunities Program, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to today's conversation, Tapping into Worker Voice to Improve Job Quality, Lessons from the Talent Pipeline Management Network. Today's event's part of our Job Quality and Practice series, which we've been on a little bit of a hiatus from, but we're glad to bring back and have heard a lot of interest in trying to get back to some conversations that give people some more strategies they can use in the work. So that's what we're really going to do today is we're going to highlight some practical strategies organizations can use to address what we at EOP think of as one of the biggest economic opportunity challenges we face, which is fixing work. Before we start today's conversation, just a quick review of some of our technology and the basic logistics. All attendees are muted. We do want to hear your questions, so use that Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to submit and upvote questions. Also, feel free to share your resources, ideas, perspectives, examples in the chat. We'll have a quick survey at the end of today's event that'll open in your web browser. Please leave your feedback and thoughts there. We hope you'll post about this conversation in the social media platform of your choice. Our hashtag is Talk Opportunity. If you have any technical issues today, please message us in the chat or email us at eop.program@aspeninstitute.org. We always record all of these events and we always send them out afterwards. So you can, if you've registered for today's event, you can expect to get the recording here in the next week or so. And closed captions are available for this session. Click that CC button at the bottom of your screen to activate them. So before I introduce our panel and we jump into this conversation, I just want to say a couple of words about how this event came about. About 2 years ago, we at the Economic Opportunities Program began this partnership with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation to develop a job quality curriculum that the Chamber Foundation would integrate into its existing talent pipeline management framework, or what they call TPM. So we're going to hear more about TPM today. But today's conversation really arose out of that partnership because while we were building this curriculum with the Chamber Foundation on job quality, what really became clear to us in part was that many of the organizations in the TPM network were already tackling job quality. And an important way they were doing so was by bringing the voices and perspectives of workers into the conversation that they were having with their employer partners. So that's what we're really going to talk about and focus on today. How can we leverage workers' voices to drive improvements in job quality? Now, obviously, worker voice is powerful and useful in so many ways, right? It can be used to drive business innovation and performance. It can be used to help with the development and adoption of technology. We use it to help inform public policy and much more than that. But workers are, of course, really uniquely positioned to share their input and perspective on how to improve their own jobs. Now, there are many different structures and organizations that are working to advance worker voice to improve job quality. In this area, we certainly owe a lot to the role labor unions have played and continue to play in advancing worker voice and job quality. At EOP, we believe strongly in the power of unions and collective bargaining to achieve change. We see other organizations too, organizing workers and really lifting up those voices to help facilitate change on job quality, such as worker centers. Different forms of employee ownership have been another channel through which worker voice has driven change. All those approaches are important, distinct, and irreplaceable from our perspective. And we'll return to those in some of our future conversations and events, but we're not necessarily going to focus there today. Today's conversation is really focused on what intermediaries and those advising and coaching businesses can do to lift up worker voice in the context of job quality. This is an important conversation for employers and practitioners of all sorts, but it stands out to me as one that's particularly important for those in workforce and economic development. I think over the past couple of decades, the common refrain in workforce for some has been to engage and listen to employers and work to identify and solve their problems. And that's, of course, really critical to success. And it's, of course, really important to the work. But very often the issues and solutions that get solely identified by employers can sometimes lead us down the path of just thinking about training as a solution. And the broader challenges of job quality and how that's causing pain points for both workers and businesses can sometimes get overlooked. Many years ago, I recall Karen Ulick, who's now on the Tucson City Council, but was in workforce before and led the Southwest Center for Economic Integrity, saying, "It's an enormous privilege and responsibility to sit between workers and employers. We must do our best to honor the voices and needs of both." So obviously part of identifying these pain points means engaging and talking to workers with the same intensity and focus that we've often put with employers. So what does that look like in practice to really listen to workers? How do we take that information and communicate it to employers to drive change, to improve jobs? That's what we're going to dive in today. So let me introduce our wonderful panel. We have Jamie Francis, who's Vice President of Policy and Programs at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation. You can read all about these people's wonderful bios on our website. I'm just going to put names to faces really quick so we can jump into the conversation. We have Michael Evans, Executive Director at the Kalamazoo Literacy Council, and we have Lori Mays, Agriculture and Equine Talent Pipeline Project Manager at the Kentucky Chamber of Commerce Foundation. So thank you, Lori. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Jamie, for being here. Let's jump in. So Jamie, I want to let you set the stage a little bit to give people a sense of like what TPM is. So tell us about TPM and how and why like worker voice and job quality were built into this framework.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Matt, both for the partnership and then the opportunity to join my colleagues today. So talent pipeline management is a framework. It's a set of tools that's meant to help employers and groups of employers, what we call employer collaboratives, come together and better manage and organize their talent supply chain strategies. So we offer a methodology that's meant to help employers get their facts straight on their demand and what are the most critical skills for their most essential roles within their organizations. And then using that data, partnering with education and training providers to co-design talent supply chain solutions. And so according to our TPM practitioners, the most common talent challenges that employers are facing are unfilled jobs, turnover and retention, lack of a diversified workforce, and lack of career advancement opportunities. And by partnering with you all, we were able to add job quality into the mix. But it also encouraged us to think about how job quality impacts the most common challenges that I stated beforehand. So what is it about the job and potential job quality improvements that could lead to greater retention and less turnover issues? What is it about job quality that could actually help us achieve a more diversified workforce? So one thing that I think is really important to acknowledge in this work is that there is a starting place for all employers. We all have an opportunity to improve. And just as with the TPM framework and job quality, what we need to understand is that this is all agile. This is meant to meet you where you are. So part of the methodology is we're encouraging employers to come together to solve for these talent challenges rather than work in isolation. And what I think was so great about the work that my colleagues in Kentucky and Michigan and other places have done is that in parallel, they're bringing together employees so that they can take a similar approach of being able to come together and kind of accurately diagnose what are these challenges that they're experiencing, and then using that as data to make improvements with the employer partners. So I think this is a really smart play. And these are two fantastic TPM practitioners that will really be able to illustrate what that looks like in practice.
Thanks for your partnership on this work too. And I just want to reiterate kind of what you said in part two, that, you know, job quality is a journey, right? And we're all kind of on it together. So Michael, tell us a little bit about the Kalamazoo Literacy Council and your initiative within the early childhood education sector.
Thank you very much, Matt. Kalamazoo Literacy Council, we're an adult ed provider that provides free literacy and language services for adults who want to improve their literacy, English, their writing, spelling, job skills, and other types of work to be able to get on a path to good employment. We were selected to serve as the host agency for something that is called the Edison Early Childhood Education Career Pathway, which is a TPM that has 9 employer partners working collaboratively to recruit talent to meet the chronic need to find qualified early learning professionals in childcare in Kalamazoo, which is in Southwest Michigan. The Kalamazoo Literacy Council, we've served as the host agency since January 2023, working with a network of community-based organizations that include education and workforce development providers, such as Kalamazoo Regional Education Service Agency, Michigan Works Southwest, and Goodwill Industries of Southwestern Michigan. They all work together to identify and recruit talent for the apprenticeship program that is run by Southwest Child Care Resources to meet that pain point that our 9 employer partners have, and that is finding qualified professionals that can be recruited and supported within their agencies. Our effort works with our employer partners to develop talent at the neighborhood level. So it's not just an on-call where we send up something up to Indeed. This is intentional recruitment at the neighborhood level within 3 core neighborhoods in the Kalamazoo community that are in need of development. It also recruits from talent from adult education providers that include area GED preparation programs, high school completion programs, and English as a second language programs, so that we can create opportunities for this developing talent to find careers in early childhood education. And I am fortunate to serve as the TPM Fellow for this employer-led collaborative located in Southwestern Michigan at Kalamazoo.
Great. Thanks so much, Michael. Looking forward to coming back to you on the how workers informed your work there. Lori, a much different sector that you're focused in part. So tell us a little bit about the Kentucky Chamber and give us a little bit of an overview of the initiative that you have within the equine industry.
Yes, thanks, Matt. So I am with the Kentucky Chamber, the foundation portion of our state chamber of commerce. And so I am lucky enough to be one of multiple TPM practitioners within our chamber foundation. And we all specialize in various sectors, industries within our state. And I have a background in agriculture. So that is the industry that I focus on, and specifically for the discussion today, equines. So if you guys are familiar with the Kentucky Derby, we have a lot of horses in Kentucky, specifically thoroughbreds, and racing facilities. And so the job quality and employee voice work that we have done within the TPM framework has specifically been centered around thoroughbred farms, most of which are centralized in central Kentucky, our bluegrass region. We worked with a lot of these farms on various things throughout the TPM kind of framework to really understand what their needs were. It went back all the way to understanding the data of the particular positions that they were needing to focus on strategically, as well as their needs over the next 2 to 3 years. Agriculture is not necessarily an industry that tracks a lot of data, and so we worked with those facilities very, very much to be able to figure out what exactly their needs were, understanding the skills that were needed with them, et cetera. And that kind of brought about some need for some leadership training, which then went back specifically to needing to understand exactly from the employees what the needs and struggles were, which is really where our employer voice came into it. We do work with a lot of other agriculture entities as well, but focus specifically on the thoroughbred industry for this matter.
Great. So let's keep going, Lori, on that train of thought. Tell us a little bit more about kind of how and why you decided to pull together this worker advisory committee, how you approached it, what that process looked like, and what you started to learn from workers.
So we originally started with this collaborative that had about 25 thoroughbred farms. So they ranged anywhere from privately owned entities that may have had less than 5 staff members, all the way up to international, more what you consider your corporate owned farms that had places around the United States, multiple facilities in Kentucky, as well as across the world. And so we brought all of these employers together in collaboratives to really understand their critical positions. They had 3 that they were targeting, and really looked at all of the data behind that. One of the things that they were really struggling with and wanted to address both was recruitment as well as retention. They were seeing, especially in their hands-on positions, with individuals that are hands-on with their horses at their farms, they were seeing turnover within a year of bringing these individuals on, and they were really trying to understand why. A lot of that came down to leadership. So the farms realized that they were promoting individuals into managerial roles for various reasons. And they had the skills that they needed, mainly coming back to horseman skills. And they were promoting them into these managerial roles and realizing that they really were not giving them the leadership training that they needed. So even though that they were great horsemen, they were not fantastic supervisors. And that's what they were hearing a lot, is that the environment, the work environment for individuals that were under these supervisors was not fantastic. And that was a lot of the reason for turnover. So we started targeting leadership training with these managers, these mid-level to low-level managers, and realized that when we started doing research of, is there anything leadership specific to agriculture, there was actually quite a bit. And so we started to try and narrow down what type of leadership training they wanted and needed, where did we need to focus, so we're not trying to boil the ocean. And what it came down to is a lot of, well, we think we need this. We think that the staff would like to see this, but they really didn't know. And so what they did originally is they created a survey, which they called the Employee Voice Survey, and they put it out specifically to the departments at their farms where they're seeing the highest turnover. They got great information back. They took that to heart, made some changes, and realized that they needed to have continual feedback from their employees. And they realized that doing surveys over and over again was not going to be helpful. So they really decided to take what we were doing with the employers in our employer collaborative space and create an employee collaborative. And so what they did is all of those participating farms ended up suggesting multiple people from their facilities, not to represent the facilities, but to represent the positions that they were targeting. So we brought those people together in an employee collaborative, and we had a good conglomeration of people across the industry that were representing their positions and not necessarily their employer, and being able to talk to them face to face about issues that the employers were bringing up, but also topics that the employees were bringing to the table. And then TPM worked as that, and myself as the kind of the coordinator, worked as that intermediary between the employee and the employer collaborative.
So maybe unpack a little bit about, before we turn back to Michael, kind of your role in kind of facilitating conversations with the employees, like how you approached that, how you did it. I know sometimes you like met at breweries and different places like that. So just talk about how you kind of built structure around that a little bit.
So when we started, we wanted to make sure that the individuals that were part of our employee collaborative were representative of the positions in the industry. We have a high rate of Hispanic individuals that have that hold those roles. So we made sure that those meetings, those employee collaborative meetings, were bilingual. So we had a translator there if needed. We met in places that were inviting. So like you said, Matt, we oftentimes met at local breweries or local parks, et cetera. And we always did it in a time that the employees could attend. So we usually did evenings. And what we did is we really wanted to get an understanding of those struggles and wants of seeing change within the industry in those particular positions. And so we started with the employers coming and saying, hey, we'd really like to understand more about X, Y, and Z topics. And then I would take that to the employee collaborative, broach those subjects with them, and we would just have conversations. I would then take that information from the employee collaborative back to the employers. So it was anonymous. They didn't know who had talked about it, but they knew that it was kind of a consensus within that position in the industry of something that needed to be addressed. As we move forward, so we used to meet about once a month. As we move forward, we started to see that the employees would then bring up topics and say, you know, this is something that we would really like addressed, but we haven't heard the employers talk about it a lot. And so they would bring up their kind of own situations or topics, and we would then address that with the employers. It was an easy way for them as the employees to broach topics that could be somewhat sensitive, and have that being really heard on a very basic level by the employers, and for them to be able to take it to heart without them feeling singled out as an employee at their own facilities. So we really saw, as we continued on, really opening up on both sides. We were very clear with the employers in the beginning, though. If they didn't want to participate, that was completely fine. But if they did, they really had to take the suggestions and the conversations that came from the employees to heart. If they knew that there were things that needed to be addressed and then didn't address them, that was worse than not participating at all. So we really wanted to make sure that there was an open line of communication, everyone felt safe in their own space, and that there was going to be action after these conversations.
Great. I just love this idea of an employee collaborative. I think that's so wonderful. And we'll come back in a minute to talking about some of the other outcomes that that collaborative helped achieve. But Michael, let's come back to you for a second. So you mentioned the Literacy Council has helped form this, kind of exciting apprenticeship program in the early childhood sector as part of your collaborative's work. And I've seen also know also that you've stipulated that employers in your collaborative have to pay at least $15 an hour to participate, which doesn't sound like much in general, but in the early childhood education sector, we often know that wages are closer to $11 or $12 an hour, and there are some real constraints on, what can be paid. So talk a little bit about how the experiences and voices of workers have helped kind of guide those decisions and the development of the apprenticeship, but also inform like this kind of wage threshold.
Thank you for letting us talk about our process. Our work really comes from the need to be able to support better wages and better work conditions for the early learning professionals who are hired by our employer partners. Our employer partners were the ones who made the decision based off of the pain point that they had for entry-level employees, the turnover rates, some of the stress that they might find, and they also wanted to be able to increase the quality of the early learning professionals who were there by connecting them officially to the apprenticeship that is held by and led by Southwest Child Care Resources. Before we just started working with Assumptions, our lead employer, YWCA Kalamazoo, really was insightful in saying, well, let's learn from our partners, but more importantly, let's learn from the employees. What are some of the things that make it so that it's challenging for people to be able to work in this very important work role? And also, what are some of the things that may be helpful? They were also, YWCA Kalamazoo, very innovative in engaging in an evaluation team that came from our WMU Homer Stryker MD School of Medicine. This evaluation team has been embedded in the process from the very beginning, asking questions, leading surveys, focus groups, and interviews to hear directly from those employees who are employed, what are some of the things that would help. Wages most definitely would help, an increase in wages. The survey that we did of local and job opportunities in childcare entry level was between $10 to $12 an hour, and you were seeing that people working in other types of sectors, from food service to healthcare, were getting paid a lot more to do a lot less. They also wanted to be respected as professionals. They are not daycare providers. They are looking after not the day, but children, and to be recognized as professionals, especially when they're achieving their CDA, that's the Child Development Associate credential, and completing their apprenticeship. And they needed to have much more support on the job. These are from their supervisors and from each other. We have a peer support network that came directly from their idea of how can we help each other to be better at the work and be prepared to be able to be more qualified and capable in the work that we have. The $15 minimum was just at the pilot phase. One of the things that our lead employer wanted to start with is what would happen if we were to set as a minimum $15 an hour. Would that really encourage a higher degree of retention, and would it attract more people into this sector? Because many people, they were leaving a sector that they had established experience in to try something new in the area of childcare. And they have found that with that increase, and it is, I would say that's more significant than what it sounds like, right? These are above what the minimums would be, has attracted people and helped them to be more supported in their roles. And we've created a system of supports that help them to be more persistent within, or more resilient within those areas. That includes wraparound services that are provided to remove barriers to participating in training, barriers to participating in continued education, and time just to be able to focus on their own professional development as they pursue their apprenticeship responsibilities. So the worker voice is part of the process. We also have had 2 childcare summits where we were giving updates about our TPM process. but also hearing some testimonials directly from our early learning professionals about the impact of the Edison ECE career pathway.
So one of the questions that came up in the chat, Michael, and Lori, feel free to chime in if this was an issue for your program too, but was the challenge of childcare in general for people who are going into the workplace. Did workers kind of relay that challenge through your process? And is that part of like some of the wraparound support services that you've been able to provide to support workers?
Most certainly. Childcare is one of the great barriers to work, great barriers to continued education. As an adult education provider, we hire navigators who are trained to remove barriers to employment, and that includes most chronically childcare. That was one of the reasons why our lead employer, YWCA Kalamazoo, selected us, is that we have some experience in working within these barriers. The key thing is to recognize that if you don't solve childcare, you can't solve practically any other employment need for other sectors. So it's something that our community as a whole sees as a high priority. And the Edison ECE career pathway has been seen as one of the promising practices to expand access to talent, particularly in those entry-level positions. So this is something that we continually focus on, and we're trying to get better at each year. The 9 employer partners that we're working with, they are very receptive to the new information that comes from what we see from the data that's provided, feedback from the evaluation process, and just from continual engagement and our monthly meetings that we have for updates.
Great. Thanks, Michael. So Jamie, let's bring you back into the mix a little bit here and kind of like what you're seeing across the TPM network at large as it relates to kind of bringing in worker voice and kind of identifying job quality issues. What are some other things you're seeing across the network, or some specific examples of work where TPM members have been really active in kind of going out and listening to workers and bringing that information back to employers in the same way that Lori and Michael have been operationalizing?
Yeah, it's really fun for us to see the various ways that our TPM partners use the model and approach worker voice. I mean, just to make one connection piece to other parts of the U.S. Chamber Foundation's portfolio is we have a team of individuals dedicated to early child care solutions. And we actually just hosted with the U.S. Department of Commerce last month the very first national summit on early child care. But one resource that has been so popular amongst the employer community is called our employer roadmap to child care. And in that resource, it provides basically a menu of options of different things, starting with, even connecting with other employers in your area who are experiencing similar things and trying to kind of come up with these solutions, to hosting an on-site childcare center within your company. It's a huge, huge range. And again, a meet you where you're at type of resource. So something for folks to look at if childcare is a challenge that your community is experiencing, like it is for so many. But this is one of the topics that came up for our partners at the Vermont Talent Pipeline Management. Our colleagues have persisted in creating a very impressive apprenticeship program for nursing. Of course, an industry and an occupation hit very hard during the pandemic, but quite frankly, just showed many challenges that, were just exacerbated as a result of the pandemic. And as they were putting together this apprenticeship program, Marianne Sheehan, our colleague who leads that collaborative, was very keen on getting the worker voice. They were trying to identify mental health service professionals, licensed certified nursing assistants, people who worked in food, nutrition related positions that could potentially have an opportunity to advance in their careers, but for one reason or another, there was something that was stopping them. And so they really incorporated worker voice as they were determining what are those wraparound support services that will be needed as part of this apprenticeship program, so that we can not just be concerned about making sure that they're getting the training while still being able to work, but what are those other life things that they really need? And so they identified organizations like Working Bridges to collaborate with them and provide mentorship and financial aid counseling, socioeconomic support, academic tutoring, to make sure that people who were participating in this apprenticeship program could continue to work, could go through the training experience and have those life needs met, so that they could persist in the program and eventually be able to access those advancement opportunities. Another example that comes to mind, our colleagues in Memphis who run the Memphis Medical District Collaborative. They've been very keen on including the neighborhood voice. Similarly to Michael, they're really looking within their community to try to find talent. There is 43% of the population in that district face poverty. And at the same time, so many employers, healthcare providers in that area are desperate to find workers. And so it was a bit of trying to figure out, well, where is the gap? How come these connection points aren't being met? Well, let's listen to the community and hear what their needs are and figure out how we can bring their needs into the mix to make sure that they can access training experiences and be able to fill these roles. And so Latasha Harris, our colleague, actually credits our colleague Lori Mays with a lot of the ideas that she's incorporated in terms of getting that community voice represented while also listening to what employer needs are so that those things can come in the middle. And so they created an initiative called Hire Local that's meant to identify and train and kind of fast track employment for these individuals who are facing poverty. And one of the things that they came to hear from community members was like, your training program's 8 weeks. I can't be unemployed for 8 weeks while going through this training program. I need some type of support. And so they were actually able to look at the skills that employers were saying they really needed and condense that training program into 2 weeks so that people could be employed within 2 weeks, which is a huge difference, while also identifying, well, what are the other things that need to come in, like childcare, like transportation? What are the other challenges that they might be experiencing that are limiting them from being able to participate in these training programs and eventually employment and advancement opportunities? So, the role of the wraparound support services really comes into play, but certainly making sure that you are connected with the people that you're trying to recruit into these roles to figure out, well, what are those supports that are most important to you? Because they might look a little bit different for one person versus the next person versus one community to another. So just being really keen to hear what people have to say and make sure to incorporate that as part of the solution design.
Great. Thanks, Jamie. So Michael, Jamie kind of brought up apprenticeship, and you have an apprenticeship model. So I wonder if you could unpack the model a little bit, why you went with apprenticeship, how worker voice maybe fit into like why you made that decision, and just what that model looks like for your participants.
The apprenticeship that we have is ran by our local hub for childcare, Southwest Childcare Resources. It's a nationally recognized apprenticeship that is meant to really be able to provide the credentials necessary to be a qualified early learning professionals. This also includes obtaining the Child Development Associate certificate credential, or the CDA, as part of the process. So this is the quality standard to know that if you are hiring someone to serve as an early learner professional, that they have the background and credentials necessary to provide quality work. The key thing that our employers are looking for are people who are able to make the transition into this career, complete their apprenticeship and CDA, and be able to remain employed within their places of employment. So our goal was to be able to connect to that existing apprenticeship, but provide the wraparound services and supports to help them to be able to be present enough to complete the training and also present enough to remain employed with their employers. One of the things that's really unique is once there's a candidate that is brought into the career pathway and hired by the employer, they are hired from the start, and they are employed with a good wage from the very beginning. That's before they've completed the apprenticeship. That's before they've completed the CDA. They get that support right directly from the beginning. That's the investment that the employers made to ensure that people who are stepping into this role are not suffering economically, waiting to complete training or waiting to complete their GED or complete their English language classes to be at full proficiency. So the decision for the apprenticeship was really, how can we recruit more intensely from the neighborhoods that have the greatest need and provide support for them to really be able to successfully make that transition into a career in early childhood education.
So Michael, so you've gotten employers to, pay a $15 minimum, right? You've built this apprenticeship model. You've embedded all these wraparound supports in the workplace and throughout training to support workers in being successful. What are you seeing in terms of like outcomes and impact, both on the business side for the employers, but also on the worker side?
Well, First of all, what we see is from the employer side is that they do have a higher likelihood of recruiting the type of talent that they need to meet their talent needs and to be able to retain that talent much more likely. In our original pilot group, they had an 80% retention rate, which was about 20% more than those who had been provided a similar level of supports. So we were able to align the wraparound service providers that were provided by our agencies with the requirements that the employers had and the requirements that the credential agency Southwest Child Care of Michigan had. This increased retention and increased worker satisfaction, but it also increased the likelihood that they were able to feel more supported within their work roles. For the worker side of things, we just listened to what they needed and they created some of their own solutions, one of which was to propose what they call a peer support network, where some of their veteran and more experienced leaders in childcare working at their agencies work together to find ways that they can support each other when it comes to applying for and completing the apprenticeship process or just understanding better what it means to work as an early learning professional. They also get support from their lead employers and the other employers in coming up with innovative ideas to be able to increase the work environment and also work satisfaction. So some of the things that have been piloted is an early learning, as a substitute support program where someone can step into your classroom where you can step away to participate in training, education, and other types of development to help you to be able to remain in your role. They also, we have a wage incentive program that we piloted that provides an incentive, a wage incentive for completion of a CDA or apprenticeship. And we're hoping to be able to scale those up. So that the key thing is aligning our services that we currently have more strategically to support advancement along the career pathway to complete their apprenticeship at Southwest Child Care Resources, and most importantly, remain employed at the employers that are part of our employer-led collaborative.
Great. Thanks, Michael. So Lori, let's turn back to you. You mentioned, some of the issues that came up with like supervisor training and how you addressed that with employers. But I know from previously talking to you that your employee collaborative identified other issues, right, related to the 6-day work week schedule as well as pay. So maybe unpack a little bit more about, kind of what you learned through workers, through the advisory committee that you put together, how you took that information back to employers, and what have been some of the other changes that you've seen as a result.
Yeah, so that for sure, leadership training for supervisors was just one piece of that. They had their original survey was fairly extensive. And so they did look at all the things in terms of, if individuals knew and or utilized upskilling opportunities within their company, whether they knew that they had educational, financial abilities within their farms as well. And one of the big things in the equine industry, specifically thoroughbreds, is the work schedule. It has historically been a 6-day work week, oftentimes in shifts, so they work 10 to 12-hour days. And that's a big deal. A lot of them only have one day off, most of the time not a weekend. And when obviously you're trying to raise a family and have all the other things that life is going on, that can be very difficult. So that's always been, sorry, my light turned off. There we go. They have been able to really focus on what might that look like if they looked at a schedule that would work more with kind of today's workforce. And one of the things that they found is that, what we always heard from employers is that it's too expensive to hire enough people to do 5-day work weeks. It's just not feasible. That's traditionally how the industry has done it, et cetera. And what we really found out from employers is most of them had never put pencil to paper. And so when they looked at understanding what it would cost to hire additional individuals to make that 5-day work week work and compare it to their cost of turnover and onboarding new individuals, that actually was exponentially higher than it would have cost them to hire on for a 5-day work week. And so when we actually had them sit down and do that for homework, which we gave them homework, these employers, these math problems, they really came back and said, most of them, I just assumed. And a lot of what TPM does is to unpack those assumptions and see if those are accurate. So what we did, and what we had some of our employers do is they did pilot programs to be able to do 5-day work weeks. So they looked at restructuring some of the requirements for their employees. So they changed around a little bit of what their daily schedule looked like. And they actually were able to kind of shift to the point where they actually gave individuals raises to be able to then work 5 days a week. Because what we are hearing on the employee side is they wanted that 48-hour work week because they needed that income. So employers were able to kind of do some really creative things to be able to keep their salary that they had been working on a 48-hour week and or increase it, but allowing them to work 40-hour weeks. And so they've done it in pilot in multiple facilities. Their retention has gone up. Their job satisfaction has gone up. And so we've seen a lot of facilities who are able to take those quote unquote risks in doing something that is not traditional in their industry and showing success. And then that has helped to really have them almost coach other facilities in how to do it, how they skin their knees, what worked, what didn't work. So using that kind of employer mentorship piece, and we've seen more facilities take on that potential opportunity. One of the other things that we saw, and this was actually in a different collaborative, same industry. So we have two of the largest equine specific veterinary hospitals in the nation here in central Kentucky. And you think of it, a human hospital just for horses. So they have a surgery department, NICU departments, infectious disease, all the things that a hospital would. And a lot of what they were seeing is turnover within their nursing staff. They knew that a lot of them came in on the road to veterinary school, so they were going to be short term, but they were seeing higher than average turnover in that position. A lot of those individuals that hold that position are young women. A lot of them come from out of town / out of state. And what they really realized through employee voice was that a lot of these young women were living alone in a city that they were not familiar with. They were working 12-hour shifts at the hospital, and they were coming home to empty apartments and homes, and they were very lonely. And so they were seeing turnover in individuals who were not just leaving the company, but leaving the industry because they just were not happy in their roles. And one of the things that kept coming up over and over again was they missed having a pet. They didn't feel comfortable having a pet at home when they were gone for 12 hours a day. Yet they missed that aspect. And so one of the things that one of our hospitals actually did was they started a pet daycare at their facility. They had physical room to be able to do it. They hired 2 individuals. We laughed because they said, we'll start with dogs and cats. We're not ready for someone to bring in their turtle and their snake yet. But they started with kind of a dog and cat daycare. Individuals brought their animals to work. They dropped them off at daycare, which was on the facility grounds. They could see them during their breaks. And then they took them home, and it was a happier home environment for them. They saw retention increase. And honestly, it was something that facilities management they said, we never in a million years would have thought that was what would help our retention. And that really just went back to showcase how employee voice is so important, to listen to what exactly they want. And they were able to make that happen. And they've seen a lot of progress from that.
As an animal lover, I love all of that. And like my new dream job is to work in like the horse hospital NICU, I think. I can't.
Right.
Sounds amazing. So Jamie, let's bring you back into this. We did have one question come in about, could you talk a little bit more about the local hire initiative you mentioned, but I'm curious just in general about like bigger takeaways from the TPM network about how you're learning, what you're learning about how organizations in the network are kind of balancing this this unique role of like sitting between workers and businesses and really trying to listen to both and kind of navigating that. And what are some of the other things you're kind of seeing in that regard about what success looks like and how people have overcome the challenges of sitting in between those two?
Yeah, and I can connect it to the Hire Local program because that's an initiative that started before our colleague was familiar with talent pipeline management. I think what is a similar theme from our partners here and so many of the partners that we work with in our talent pipeline management network is that it's not as if conversations aren't being had. It's not as if initiatives don't exist. It's that oftentimes there's a methodology that's missing or these conversations are missing process. And so we keep coming together to have sometimes very, great conversations in which we're able to kind of put our issues on the table, but we're often not able to figure out, okay, where do we go from here? So having a process or a methodology or a framework, whether that be TPM or otherwise, can be very helpful to move you from conversation to taking action. And in our minds, there's no greater really contributor to being able to take action than employer-driven data. That primary labor market information, as Lori and Michael have attested, can be a total game changer in terms of really understanding what is the issue. We're often of the mindset to kind of jump to what we assume is the issue, or we jump to what we assume is going to be the right solution. But if we work through a process in which we're letting this information, directly coming from employers, and in this case, as we think about worker voice, directly coming from employees, we marry those things together in a really impactful way that can deliver the results that TPM as a framework really tries to model, which is shared value. That's what supply chain management is all about. It's all partners succeeding, being accountable to one another, and getting the types of outcomes that we're all trying to get. That's ultimately what talent pipeline management is trying to do. And so this inclusion of worker voice through job quality is a really great complement to what the framework has always embodied. And so I think that, as we think about employers liking action and they like to see results, this is a framework that can help model that, and something that we teach in our TPM Academy. And we actually have an upcoming virtual learning experience coming up on August 6th in the case that anybody's interested in enrolling. And major bonus is that Lori Mays is one of the TPM Academy faculty members who will be teaching for that cohort, where you can come together with peers who are tackling similar issues. But I think that this common theme of collaboration is so important, is so key. But we need to make sure that information is driving those partnerships. And by information, we think that this employer-driven information is so essential. Add in that job quality component of worker voice, and that can truly be a game changer. But providing these important groups a safe space to have conversations, to air out their grievances, but we bring that information together in a really productive way, as Lori and Michael have exemplified. So it's less so the finger pointing and frustration. It's okay, what are we going to do about it? And one thing that I really want to commend Lori and Michael's employers for is that one thing we have to understand is that if we invite workers into the conversation to discuss, like, what are your pain points, as we like to say in the TPM world, we as the employer community need to make sure that we're keeping them updated as we work on solutions. So that consistent feedback loop, just like we model in TPM for our employer collaboratives, is really important for these groups of employees so that they know that the information that they've shared is valuable, that they've been heard, that it's being worked on. And it's not to say that every single issue that they bring up is something that employers will be able to resolve overnight. It's being very transparent about, this is our process. We have heard you. We want you to know that we're working on these things. Here's what we're doing in the short term. Here's some long-term potential outcomes, just to make sure that we are all on the same page in terms of, hey, we're doing something with this information, because this is a very action-oriented framework, and we want to make sure that that carries out in terms of inclusion of worker voice as well.
So Jamie, just a quick follow-up that around the TPM event on August 6th, people were wondering about an access code. It seems like they're unable to register. I don't know if you have that available or if we can send it out after the webinar.
Yeah, we're happy. There shouldn't have to be an access code, but we're happy to send it out afterwards for you to be able to enroll in the August 6th cohort. So we'll make sure to get that out to folks. And if one of my TPM colleagues is on the call, we can try to get that out during the live webinar too.
Great. Well, I have kind of a wrap-up question that I'm going to save for a minute and bring in a few more audience questions here. Michael, a lot of interesting questions coming in about the apprenticeship program you run, and I'm going to go through a few of them, and you can hopefully answer them. One, is it registered? Two, how long is it? And then three, have you been able to like leverage any WIOA dollars to help offset some of the costs of that?
Yes, well, first of all, the apprenticeship is actually run by our hub, Southwest
Right.
Care Resources, and our
Right.
job is to recruit talent into that hub. And they're going to spend about 15 months working on their apprenticeship, going through their CDA process, and following the guidelines that are provided by Southwest Child Care Resources to ensure that they are able to complete the apprenticeship. So that's one of the things that we really try to focus on is if we understand what the requirements are, how can we support those early learning professionals who are working with us to be able to meet those requirements through tutoring and peer mentor sessions and wraparound services and supports.
Great. Lori, could you talk a little bit more about kind of the outcomes you've seen to date? There is a question around like what was learned about moving from the 6-day to a 5-day work week, but I know there were a number of changes you've made, and kind of a question I posed to Michael earlier, similar to you. What have you learned about how these changes have impacted the worker experience as well as, you know, kind of business outcomes?
Yeah, so if you're familiar with the agriculture industry at all, the ag industry is very traditional, and a lot of things that employers kind of look at and do in terms of, you know, schedules and procedural things, it's because, well, that's how grandpa did it. And so we have been doing a lot of employer education around kind of changing with the times of the workforce of today, and what does that look like in terms of how they run their businesses. So specifically around the work week, you know, that was something that we had heard for, it feels like eons in the employee world, and something that was heard by employers, but they just didn't know how to tackle it. And or they didn't realize or think that they needed to, because this is just the way it was in the industry. And when we literally had someone at a symposium stand up and say, well, if someone is not willing to work 6 days a week in all types of weather conditions, then they just need to find a different industry. Well, they are. That's the problem, is that they are not in our industry. And so I think that was a big wake up call. What they did find is that a lot of the farms that have gone to those 5-day work weeks, they do it on a rotating schedule, but they always have consecutive days off. So about once every 5 weeks, they have a weekend day off. About every 6 weeks, they have a full weekend off. And so it rotates. They may have a Monday, Tuesday, they may have a Thursday, Friday, et cetera. So there's different ways that different employers have done it. We do find that the farms that have implemented that 5-day work week, their retention has gone up significantly, especially in those 3 target positions. But there's a lot of other things that they've looked at too. They've looked at various you know, childcare has been a big issue. Obviously in agriculture, that's usually in rural areas. Childcare as well as transportation is a huge hurdle for staff, you know, getting to facilities and then being able to work because of childcare. We do have a couple of neighboring farms. They're collaborative members, but they're neighboring geographically, that have gone in together and put a childcare center at one of the facilities. And it does help with the childcare at those 3 facilities that are kind of together, working on it together. So a lot of really neat kind of solutions have come about through just the network Jamie spoke about, with the employers when they're in a collaborative together, and then in that larger community of employers that are really looking at workforce solutions, being able, you know, to talk about what's worked and what hasn't worked. We also see in our veterinary industry a lot is very, very similar to human healthcare in a lot of ways. And so a lot of the issues that my colleague at the Chamber Foundation, the Kentucky Chamber Foundation, is working on in healthcare, specifically in hospitals, we've done a lot of crossover work with our veterinary industry, because they are looking at things like pay and schedules and all of those things that, you know, regardless of what patient you're working on, those are realities within those industries. So I think being able to have that that network of employer support has also been extremely helpful for our collaborative members, and then just seeing the solutions that have worked across the board has been able to give new ideas and kind of roadmaps, if you will, to a lot of our employers for various issues that they're facing.
Great, thanks. So maybe a question for all three of you related to kind of engaging employers in the job quality conversation, and how to approach that. Obviously, I think there's depending on the employer, there's different entry points into that conversation, right? I think sometimes we hear, one way is kind of approaching it through an employer pain point. So maybe they're experiencing high retention and there's a job quality issue that lurks behind that. And that's kind of the entry point. There's other related ways to approach the conversation as it relates to kind of a lack of job quality kind of impacting the bottom line of a business, right? And that could be due to retention again, or just like poor performance or lower productivity. But I think part of what we're learning at EOP through our work too is that particularly with small businesses, sometimes approaching it from the business angle doesn't work. Sometimes they're turned off by that. And particularly with small businesses in a little bit closer, tight-knit communities, seem really engaged by the thought of like their reputation and who they are in the community. And that has been another way that some organizations we work with have kind of broached the conversation on job quality with employers. And I'm just curious, in your work, like in any of your work, what have been some of your observations about how to approach that conversation and what seems to work in different contexts?
So I think one of the things that we've seen is, a lot of our collaborative members do a lot of work in the K through 12 school systems. So they are working on a lot of work-based learning opportunities, co-ops and stuff, especially within the high school realm. And a lot of them are on board, and they, present to these students opportunities. And we talk about it as being an employer of choice. When a student has the ability to choose, how do you make yourself stand out as a business? And that may be culture within your operation. That may be opportunities that individual would have to gain new skills or to move up kind of the ranking ladder, if you will. And that's kind of given a healthy competition amongst our collaborative members, who are also really great, collaborators, is how do you become that employer of choice in an industry that there are options for workers and students who are coming into the industry. So I think that's been kind of a neat twist that we've seen on it too, that is given them opportunities to kind of level themselves up.
I think in our instance in Kalamazoo, we really listen to what our employers say about themselves, particularly our lead employer, YWCA Kalamazoo. When you look at their mission, they are really working on eliminating racism and empowering women. And that means that in this space, if you're hiring early learning professionals, that needs to show up in the way that they are supported at work. And many of our employer partners, they share that same sentiment of making sure that there's empowerment for our workers, and people know that when they join this career pathway that they will be supported, respected, and ultimately compensated in a way where they can advance. Also, a large amount of the culture that we have, talking with the employers that we've gathered, especially in the beginning process, is to make sure that everyone has a voice, that they can be heard, and everyone has an equal standing in that voice. And we tried to make sure that our weekly meetings that we had in the beginning, we call our Friday Awesome meetings, truly were opportunities to learn from each other and develop some capabilities of supporting the entire sector and being representatives of what it means to be a good employers of early learning professionals that feel like they have found a good place to work at. So it's meant to look at it more from a cultural standpoint. Can we make sure that we have an employment space that people want to join? And can we support employers so that they can be that type of employer that attracts that type of talent that they would like to see?
I love that.
The only thing that I would love to add,
Jamie.
if I can,
Yeah.
only thing that I would add, Matt, is that I think that with talent pipeline management, we really emphasize that this is an employer-driven approach. So if leaning into doing this because it's for the social good is what will work for that particular group of employers to get them started, then that is an awesome place to start. But it doesn't have to be an either or, right? We can work in making that business case, because what we want to make sure is that as we develop these solutions to tackle our greatest talent challenges, we're thinking about the long game, the long-term sustainability plan. And so sometimes coupling that CSR case with the business case is what will really help make their engagement sustained in the long time, rather than maybe the leadership changes and all of a sudden you've got this fantastic initiative, but because you haven't coupled that business case with the social good, it goes away. And so I would just suggest that if that's where employers are leaning into, that is awesome. Start there, but make sure that you are working in that potential for developing a return on investment so that we see this as part of the long game.
Excellent. So we just have a couple minutes left here, and Michael, Lori, I wonder if there's anything final you want to share with the audience about kind of where your work's maybe headed in the months and years ahead, or any final like takeaways or lessons learned about this kind of idea of bringing worker voice into these strategies.
So in our case, we are looking at our next chapter, working with our local workforce development agency, Michigan Work Southwest, to complete a state apprenticeship expansion grant that they applied for, to make sure we can recruit more people into this career. So our job really is to find out how can we sustain this career pathway, attract more talent that is capable of working within this field. And we are looking at how can we expand and replicate our practice of neighborhood-based approach to talent development across not just one community, but several communities, utilizing our adult ed and other partners that we have in our community.
Yeah, and one small thing, I guess, that we're working on at our chamber here in Kentucky is that we launched what we call academies a couple years ago with our Fair Chance Academy. And we are since then doing different academies, and what those really focus on is employer education around particular populations. So Fair Chance Academy was kind of instructing employers how to be a good fair chance employer. How do you recruit and retain individuals? And a lot of that is listening to the voices of the individuals within those populations. So we also have a military hiring academy, as well as a disability academy and a new American academy. So really targeting on those particular populations and helping employers understand those populations, but also getting them connected to an employer network who are targeting those particular populations for recruitment as well. So one thing that has kind of come out of our employee voice as well, specific to populations.
That's great. Well, we're out of time, unfortunately. I know there were a number of questions we didn't get to, but I know Lori, Michael, and Jamie are more than eager to respond if you all want to reach out via email or other. Thank you, Jamie, Lori, and Michael, for being here today and sharing your perspective and expertise. A lot of inspiring work, I think, going on there. Thank you so much to this wonderful audience that showed up, that was engaged, that asked great questions, gave great comments. If you're in the audience and you have an interesting story about tapping into worker voice, or you have any tools or resources, please reach out to us at EOP as well. We'd love to learn more about what's going on in this work and shine a light on it if possible too. In the meantime, we're going to be taking August off from our events, but join us on September 4th at 2:00 Eastern for another event in this series that we're calling Seizing the Moment on Workers' Rights, a toolkit for organizers and practitioners. We're going to have a really exciting and esteemed panel of leaders from the public, philanthropic, and nonprofit sector discuss how kind of cross-sector collaborations and other strategies can strengthen worker protections. Thank you so much to our team at the Economic Opportunities Program, including Tony, Nora, Francis, and Maureen, Colleen, Sina, and many others, and to our colleagues at Architects for pulling this event off as well. And we'll see you all next time. Thanks so much.